introduce the three panelists, Kristen Smith, Tiffany Grant King, and Toyin Dada. And I don't think I could do any justice to introducing kind of who they are. So I wanted to save the first portion of this event to give each person a chance to really talk to who she is, give us some context. They're all in different geographical locations, I think different kind of like industries or professions. So it'll be really great to hear a chance to get a chance to hear about that before we go into the Q&A. So I'm going to start with Kristen, and maybe you can give us a bit about yourself.
I just want to thank everyone for allowing me to come and join this discussion today. I've really been looking forward to it. So my name is Kristen Smith, and I am a fourth-year emergency medicine resident at a level 1 trauma center in Philadelphia. I completed my undergraduate training at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And then I did research in the area of health disparities and physician and healthcare provider cultural and linguistic competency before going to medical school. I went to an osteopathic medical school, which I'm not sure if people are aware of the difference between allopathic and osteopathic medicine, but both are fully licensed in the US to practice medicine, do surgeries, go into any specialty. So I went to the Rowan University School of Osteopathic Medicine in New Jersey, and then now I am finishing up training in Philadelphia.
Awesome. And Tiffany, we'll go to you next.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tiffany Grant here with all of you on this evening. I am to just give the quick overview or the 5 to 8 minute overview. What you want, in God?
You can do the 5 to 8 minute overview.
Oh, okay.
You can go into it.
Okay, so Tiffany Grant King, as I mentioned earlier, I live in Oakland. HP as a global program manager supporting our diversity, equity, and inclusion program, supporting specifically partnerships and also talent attraction. So how did I get here? So born and raised in Sumter, South Carolina. So love the South, love my people. Went to University of Tennessee, Knoxville, got my undergraduate degree in mechanical minor in business. While I was in undergrad, I actually completed a cooperative learning program in which experience in the paper industry, pharmaceutical industry, and automotive industry. So in terms of number, from a typical 4-year, it took me 5, which was still awesome. So that experience is something I could never replace. And then it was like a talk, grad school, or do I go into corporate America? And I said, well, if I go into corporate America, I'll probably never go. I said, let's go ahead and apply to grad school, and applied and accepted an offer into the PhD program at the for mechanical engineering, and made my trek from South Carolina out to the Bay Area, where I have been actually 2 years into the graduate PhD program at UC Berkeley. I said, this is not for Tiffany. Like, So I wrapped up with my master's, completed that term, took about 9 months off, and then took my trek America world, in which I spent 6 years at the Clorox company, taking stints in packaging engineering, 2 years in manufacturing, and then 2 years in something that some of us may recall like consumer product marketing roles. So how do we the products that we're developing and making are what our actual consumers want and desire to have. Around 6, so, okay, something has to change and shift. So I left corporate America, and I actually started my own consulting business, engineering, because I was really concerned about the way in which Black and Brown youth were being educated in America. I'm not that much older than them, but it seems like they're getting less in terms of experience and exposure. So then I did that work. Years focused on K-12, then I added 3 years focused on higher ed, and a lot of my mentees happening in corporate America. And I said, okay, what's not happening? So some of the things that they were experiencing were the same things that I experienced And I said, well, and one of my mentors was like, well, Tiffany, the only way you could really figure out what's really not happening in corporate America is if you America again. So miraculously enough, this opportunity and position opened up, and I learned about it at for it and went through the rounds of interviews and was accepted, and I joined HP in December of 2018. A little more than 2 years, but just ensuring that I stay focused on my purpose when it comes to STEM and being an engineer, growing up in the South. When I say grow up in the South, like we have acres of land. I worked on tractors with my dad. It's something that I started early on, being hands-on, building things, building houses and barns. And so just having that mindset coming over now into this HR role, totally different, but still understanding the importance of the impact and the for the next generation. So yeah, 'cause I've been in this role and just trying to continue to ensure that we are removing any or systems that are in place that are preventing the access for diverse communities to really have movement and impact in the world of STEM. That's me. And I got a husband, but that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. And
You're
Toyin?
welcome.
Hi, I'm Toyin Dada. I go by Toyan. I am currently a radiology resident, a first year at a hospital in New York City. Wanted to thank you for allowing me to have an opportunity to speak with you. So about me, I am a first generation Nigerian American. I'm one of 4 kids. Born in New York, moved to Jersey, went to Rutgers, and I studied biology. I knew I wanted to be a doctor at a relatively young age. The running joke is that with immigrant parents, you really have 3 options. You're a lawyer, you're a doctor, or a business person, and I chose medicine. But I also had opportunities to work with someone who had autism. I volunteered in the hospital, so it really solidified that this is where I wanted to be. So went to college at Rutgers, went to med school at Rutgers as well. And that's where I was exposed to radiology. I actually met my first Black preceptor ever. He was like, hey, do you want to hear about radiology? And I was like, yes, I do. I don't really understand this field. It's not something we're commonly exposed to during med school. And I had a chance to do some rotations. I fell in love with it instantly. It was a great mix between art, tech, and patient care. And it was a great fit for me. I'm still pretty brand new to it, but I do not regret my decision. When I'm not at work, learning how to read scans. I'm part of the American College of Radiology Diversity and Inclusion team. And what we do, our job is to recruit medical students who may not have exposure to radiology. Right now, I believe about 2% of the radiology field are Black radiologists right now, which is a very small number. So we obviously have a ways to go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Kristen, did you want me to circle back to you, or are you good? I feel like I didn't give you a chance.
No, that's fine. I'm
Okay.
sure it'll come up as we talk.
All right. Thank you. And so when I was thinking about the concept for this panel, I actually asked a lot of different women to participate, probably too many different women, and there was so much interest, which was great. But when I was thinking about the event itself, I really wanted it to be something that was small, with a few number of people speaking and people with varied experiences. So I'm hoping that you'll hear throughout all of this moderated Q&A and the open Q&A that these 3 women, they're all at different stages in their careers, they're different parts of the country, that there's still a lot of similarities in the experiences that we all have kind of as Black women in technical fields. Because I should also say I am also a Black woman who is an engineer in a technical field. And even though there are a lot of differences, there's a lot of things that unite us and a lot of areas for improvement, I think, especially in representation, also in allyship and lifting all of us up together. So I think with that, we're going to make a shift into this moderated Q&A. I'm going to ask a few questions, and I want to give all three panelists a chance to respond and have some back and forth together. And this is really just meant to be kind of open conversation. So my first question to all of the panelists is, how do you feel that representation of Black women in STEM fields differs from that of women in general? Does anyone want to go first?
I see Kristen was going. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Toyin.
Sure. Well, I mean, I imagine that the number is we're not well represented. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this event. I would say personally, I hadn't really seen a Black woman as any of my teachers in high school, in college, and even in medical school. That was the first time I saw a Black woman. Currently in my program, I am the only one that is Black, a Black woman. There are other Black men. So unfortunately, we're not there yet. We've got a ways to go for sure.
I definitely agree with Toyan. So growing up, I think I had a African American doctor once, just, going to the doctor. It was once when I had to go to the ER for some reason that I can't remember. And then it wasn't so throughout my college classes in undergrad, all of my science classes, I had no professors of color, whether that be African American, Indian, Asian. All my professors were white. Actually, one of my chemistry professors was Chinese, but so never really seeing a lot of Black people within the STEM fields. It wasn't until I had signed up to do a research job on campus that I met an African American physician who kind of was instrumental in getting me to where I am, getting me to believe in myself that I was able to become a doctor. I had always wanted to be a doctor from, a very small age, but I had some barriers and some things that came up along my path. And especially in college, when you're taking college level coursework that you may not have been properly adequately prepared for with your high school coursework, you sometimes encounter some issues with standardized test taking and knowing how to study the right way for these difficult classes. And it really wasn't until I met this particular physician who really kind of gave me that confidence that I knew if she could do it, I could do it too, because there's so much power in seeing someone who looks like you, who has gone through a lot of the same struggles you have gone to. They know how to speak to you in a different way. And like Toyan mentioned, there just is not enough representation, whether that be in all the STEM fields, medicine, engineering, mathematics. It's really difficult. At my particular program, I am one of 2 African American females in the program. So I definitely understand how isolating at times it can be and how difficult.
And just to stand in agreement with what everyone has already shared, I think when I read that question that you sent in, it's like in compares to that of women in general, I've never thought about it that way. To be honest, I think when I go home, I'm typically used to being the only female, and I'm used to being the only Black. That question kind of threw me to even make me reflect on what has my experience been. I think at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, we did have great diversity was reflected there. There was one Black professor in the industrial engineering department who females flocked to her for mentorship and for guidance. It was just awesome seeing her in that position at the university. To UC Berkeley, it was limited there as well. So just in terms of looking for that female example, I think um, I would always look for the black example, because I was always a part of like minority in programs or African American this. So just looking for my community wherever I was choosing to I found to be of the greatest importance to me. And then I would bring in others as I saw them come into the same space. But there's definitely a lack. We're in the world of tech. Tech has less than 5%, Black African American people. To me, that's totally unacceptable, especially for the simple fact that we all use tech on a regular basis, and should be in innovation and just to its overall development in terms of how it can actually impact our lives, but even to be used in medicine, in all different industries and different areas. So I think there's a lot of work to do. Can definitely increase with all the efforts that I'm sure all four of us are doing.
And so there are a lot of things that you all touched on that I kind of want to highlight before we move on. So first, Kristen, you were talking about the first time you had an African American physician, and Toyin, you talked about always wanting to be a doctor. And I know for me, when like a lot of you, when I was in my classes in high school, actually in grade school as well, in college, I was the only Black person. A lot of times I was one of very few women. And I actually was told multiple times that I should not pursue engineering. And I don't think that I would have seen it as something that was viable for me if it hadn't have been for my parents, because I didn't see people in those types of professions. Did you guys grow up with similar kind of feelings of not necessarily feeling accessible to those types of jobs? And when did you have that switch? I guess for Kristen, it would have been this physician, but what about for everyone else?
Sure. So for me, I think in high school, I had a lot of friends who said, I don't see you as a doctor, which was kind of threw me off. Like, why? Why don't you see me as a doctor? I didn't really go into that. I mean, I was in high school. But I think I saw it in my sister. She's actually the first physician in our family. So she kind of became my role model and kind of modeled the path for me to. And then additionally, I was really fortunate to have been part of a program in Rutgers called the Office of Diversity and Success in the Sciences, where the program is literally crafted for minority students who want to go into medicine or any other health profession. So we kind of had that community like Tiffany had talked about, and we saw they brought those people back to kind of talk to us too. So I knew I could do it. So between my sister and that program, that was kind of my motivation to be one as well.
I think for me, I just always wanted to be an engineer. Like I always wanted to build things and make things, and I love to see how things work. So you couldn't tell because all the other voices in my head said I could, and my parents were all very extremely instrumental. Was exposed to summer programs, summer camps. In the summertime, it wasn't like, oh, we're gonna go outside. And my mother was a teacher too, so understanding the fact that you can take community college classes for free, while you're in high school, advantage of those opportunities, and just not. Unfortunately, I was just telling a parent that we, as in terms of Black families, eliminate ourselves and our kids from opportunities before they even apply. Get into that program if they could get that experience. And sometimes it's just about getting the experience that sparks that fire that even shows of what's possible. So yeah, for me, it wasn't even an option. I was definitely going to be an engineer, despite whoever was saying.
I think another thing all three of you kind of touched on is so there's representation and having a person in your life or someone that you see that looks like you and the empowerment that comes from that. And then there's also a degree of exposure, just being exposed to different things and your world being expanded. And I know, Toyin, you're doing that with radiology. Tiffany, you basically do that with your job now as well. And Kristen, I know that you're involved in a lot of organizations, and that's part of why I really wanted to bring you all together. So maybe we can talk just a bit about kind of like passing the torch and the things that you all do to pass on that representation, pass on that exposure to kids that might not get it otherwise, or adults, really, anyone.
I know for me, I can't tell you how many times I've had patients tell me I'm the first Black physician that they've had. They can't believe I'm a physician. Usually it is met with a lot of praise and encouragement. Occasionally it is met with skepticism and extra criticism. I really just try to be visible, be on different panels like this. I also, obviously more pre-COVID, but I try to volunteer throughout medical school. I volunteered at a local high school. We used to put on different lectures about different topics and just how to like make your CV and how do you fill out FAFSA and things for applying to college. So just being visible, I think, is very important now with social media. I know that a lot of people use social media as a way to kind of promote themselves and their field, but I think it also shows representation. You can access anywhere. Anyone throughout the country can reach out to me at any time and just ask me questions about how did I get to where I am? What summer programs did I do? I am also part of the board of directors for the Summer Health Professions Education Program. So they've gone through several different iterations, but it is a summer program that allows college students interested in the health professions to take 6 weeks and go to a certain campus. Usually it's affiliated with a hospital and a medical school. And you stay on campus, you get to meet physicians, usually physicians of color. You get to shadow them to see about different fields, and you also get a pre-exposure to medical school classes. So you'll do some biochemistry and some anatomy and things like that. So it's a really great opportunity to give yourself exposure. That is a program that I was really passionate about and really gave me an early exposure as well. So I think for me, I try to just stay out there, stay visible. I am always willing to talk to anyone. I have several mentees, and I think it's really important once you get to our stage, and even when you're going along that journey, it's important to reach back and tell people, you know, I struggle with this. I had difficulty with MCAT. I may have had difficulty with my boards, you know, and be very open and honest and just encouraging to others.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I'll share. Same thing, like Kristen said. It's kind of like not even me. I pull you along. Like we're gonna do this together. I think one thing for me is always extremely important is staying in terms of the professional memberships that I may have, or engineering memberships I may have, the different like the National Society of Black Engineers, the Society of Women Engineers. Those groups exist. But then how am I also staying my unified school district? How am I staying connected to the kids in my church or in my community directly, up at their schools on a regular basis to be that face of that example? Even in this virtual world, there's still to have that representation and make sure our presence is known. And I say it's two things: exposure and then also awareness. So not just making the parents, making young people aware opportunities, but also making sure they get exposed. So making sure they register, making sure they show up, make sure they come back to you and say, well, Miss, exposed to this at this camp or this 2-day conference they're doing. There's so many different opportunities that are taking place right now on free, that if there is anything you want to learn or be exposed to, I'm just highly encouraging them to, pack your little pack, because we all get a little, restless sitting in front of the computer for a few hours, but pack your little snack pack and, have to the side, but make sure you're present to learn, because when our world does eventually open back up, you're then going to have the barrier for registration or costs for travel. So we don't want those barriers to prevent them from getting that exposure now.
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said before. Visibility is definitely very important. And I guess the one thing I would emphasize is it can happen at any stage of your career. I'm a little bit at the beginning, but there's always someone behind you that could use a little support and a little bit more sponsorship. So there's a medical student behind me that I can grab. There's a medical student can grab someone in college and talk to them. There's no shortage of opportunities, and it's never too late to learn or pick them up.
Yeah, definitely.
And goes, I'll say one more thing, just building on what Toyin said, is about, if you see someone, grab them along and take them along. Don't see anyone. Like, how do we then lean on our colleagues to say, okay, do you not see what I'm seeing? I shouldn't be the only. Awareness to other people's attention. I think oftentimes as Black women, we put certain weights and responsibilities on our shoulders that don't necessarily, but we feel like we have to make that investment in order to see it come forth. But I think it's also a good responsibility for me to look at my colleagues. I know you guys see the same thing that I'm seeing. What can we do together and collectively in order to drive diversity in certain areas?
Definitely. And yeah, and we're actually going to come back to that, I think, in a little bit. But one thing I also did want to ask is, since you all are kind of in the business of opening doors, is there anything that you see that is really different from when you were kids to now that you're kind of paving the way for others? I know there's still a lot of work to do.
When you say different, what do you mean?
Do you think representation has gotten significantly better? Do you think people's experiences are different? Or do you think a lot of the same things that you experienced, like when you were in undergrad or when you were doing your master's, people are still kind of seeing today in mass? Black women.
Yeah. I think that excitement, you still see that excitement in young people's eyes when they want to learn something. And you can almost see the spark go off for them. That's still consistent when you've given them a new experience, totally changed your life. And that's something that's encouraging. Maybe a little bit harder now to pull parents along. This is a priority for your kid, but once you finally get them to see the priority in it, just seeing that spark in a life, I think that's still consistent. The differences, I don't know if I can speak on that one, so I'm gonna hand that off.
I was just wondering. I think so. As I'm going to move on to the next question, but even in the first, I heard a lot kind of about you guys talking about being the only person in your classes, being the only person in your jobs, being the only person in your programs, and the reactions that you get from others, like Toyin, your friend saying they don't see you as a doctor, or Kristen, people saying they are surprised you're a physician. And I know a lot of those kind of like microaggressions are really rampant against Black women. So I wanted to ask, kind of thinking about microaggressions or even just aggressions in general, how would you describe, or like maybe can you give an example of the specific obstacles or barriers or issues that you had in pursuing your career now, to as it is now as a Black woman?
I think perception is a very big proponent in terms of microaggression. So, we know that there aren't that many Black women in medicine. There aren't that many African Americans, Black people in general in medicine, women and men. And then also historically in medicine, there haven't been equal numbers of women. Currently, it's 50-50 in medical school, but actually practicing physicians, it's still lagging behind. So the majority of practicing physicians in most fields, the specialties are still men in general. So I know that for me in my field of emergency medicine, you know, we get critical patients all the time. We have patients who may come in coding, meaning they don't have any pulses. So someone has to be the physician leader to kind of get everyone on board and direct the patient's care. And I know, you know, our attendings, which are the supervising physicians who really teach us in residencies as residents, they always, you know, tell us to be aggressive and to be very assertive in terms of making plans and making sure everyone is on board and just really being the leader of that team. And it's interesting to me how a lot of our colleagues always perceive the male colleagues when they are being this way and being leaders. Oh, you're a leader, you're doing a great job. And then women, you know, there are certain people within, you know, our department who are a little bit more assertive and confident in the way they speak and the way they direct the team. And they may be called the B word, or they may be called, you know, doing too much. And then I myself, I kind of have a soft voice, well, higher voice. I speak loud, but I have a higher voice. And I generally have always been told I'm a pretty nice person. I've been very shocked by some of my colleagues who say like, oh, I heard you over the phone talking to somebody and you were just so stern. You were just so mean. And I'm just always taken aback because I don't know how much of it is actually true or it's the perception that a Black woman being assertive and being confident is a negative, is mean, is being the B word, is being too much. So that is something that I feel like comes out as little microaggressions daily that I've always just found interesting. And I'm really interested to hear how Tiffany and Toyan, you know, have had, what experiences they have had with that.
Yeah, I echo a lot of the experiences you had, the perception where, you know, I'll give them a full plan about what we're going to do for the day. This was when I saw more patients and they would say, okay, I'm waiting for my doctor. And I'm kind of like, well, I am your doctor. I guess also another aggression that I didn't think I would have to deal with was my name was another thing. People wouldn't, so a lot of my preceptors wouldn't try to learn my name. But they would learn, my other counterparts' names well and be able to pronounce them, but never really try with me. Man, the list goes on. During one of my core rotations, I had a preceptor who gave me poor marks, even though I knew I was working hard, didn't tell me until the end. It was, the list goes on, and they really do add up. But yeah, those are the preception thing is definitely one of the bigger things that we deal with, especially in the medical field.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I often have to and still deal with is people thinking I'm young, you did not just graduate. So it's kind of like you almost have to establish your credibility before you can even do any work. Big of an issue because often I try to just, you go in a room, you demand attention, you demand people to, not in an aggressive way, but it's like you come in, you're prepared, like you said, you come in with your strategy, your plan, everyone has their roles and responsibilities. But then for me, because I'm taking a break out of a technical role into like an HR position, oh, I don't know HR, and everyone's thinking they have to educate me, on what different HR roles are. Okay, I've been employed. So if I've been employed, I've been experiencing HR for over, 10, 15 years. So I know what type of experiences I would love for others to have. And I try to leverage that in my daily work and in my daily walk. And I think it's a matter of when we see and experience those microaggressions, calling them out. Because if someone's bold enough to do it to me, I'm just as bold enough to call you out. What did you say? Did you mean to say that? And sometimes those conversations can be had at that moment, and sometimes they can happen in Zoom chat. But as long as they are addressed, because the only way someone may know that what they've done is a microaggression is if you expose it to them. I know one thing that we have, and Ngazi knows, is that at HP is unconscious bias. And I often say bias is not unconscious. Like you know exactly what you're doing. So your experiences may help influence, or your lack of experiences may give you the boldness to say or do certain things. But we're going to educate each other together along the way. So I think it's definitely important that when we experience those biases, that we call them out and we educate together. We all learning on this process and journey together.
And so when you've experienced an aggression or any type of bias, have you always felt empowered to call it out yourself? Or have you ever been in a situation where you're like, I don't know if I'm the person?
I've always felt empowered to call it out myself because I don't want to experience it again. And I don't want, if they've done it in front of a group of people, for others to feel like, oh, it's okay to do that. No, it's not okay for you to do that. Because I think it's kind of like when you were little, your parents, if they let you get away with something, they didn't address it, then you felt like, oh, that must be okay. Like, no, but if you got a little popping on the hand, then you knew not to do that again. So I think it's very important for you to know that you have that power and for you to leverage your voice. Oftentimes I see people go silent. And sometimes you may need a pep talk, or I'll see people go silent. And I think that's when I can step up in defense of someone else. When I recognize a microaggression that is happening, that I speak up on their behalf. And then that gives them, makes them feel empowered. So hopefully the next time they're in a space, they're feeling comfortable and confident enough to call out microaggressions that they may be witnessing at that time.
And so, before I ask another question about microaggressions, but do you think a lot of them, or when you're experiencing bias from specific people, that a lot of it is down to the sort of competing idea in people's minds of what a doctor is, what an engineer is, because of historical context? Or do you think there's anything else kind of like lying in there in general?
I think even in there, your definition of who someone is based on your experience. So I think that's probably the best way. So until you're exposed to something new and something different, sometimes you don't, or you haven't sought to find other differences from what your norm is, then it's legitimate to a point for you to have that reaction or that response. I think Kristen or Toyin can probably speak to this. It's kind of like, now that after, because when I came to the Bay Area, I had never had a Black doctor physician. But when I came to the Bay Area, I said, okay, I'm going to find me a Black doctor, a Black physician. So it's something that I wanted to invest and, make sure my care was being overseen by someone who could relate more directly to some of the challenges that Black females may experience, during our childbearing years, and not having to educate my doctor every time I went in to have a conversation with them if something was arising with me physically. So, yeah.
Kristen, Toyin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think Tiffany covered it pretty well. I was just going to say, I think sometimes people are used to a certain type of person, as Tiffany alluded to, being in certain roles. And when you're operating outside of that role, it's very hard for them to think like, I'm used to you being this and only this. And now I'm having to take, direction or, orders or what have you. I'm your subordinate, and I'm used to, people who may look like you, whether it be your gender or your sexual orientation or your race, ethnicity, being, less than or in a subordinate role to me. I think some people have difficulty with that concept, and that's where some of these microaggressions come from.
And so, Kristen, you mentioned earlier about like social media and how that kind of has helped with representation because you can have access to really anyone in the world. And yet still people's experiences can seem very narrow. Do you feel like with sort of this rapid globalization and I guess like social media-ification of the world that representation is moving at the same pace as that rapid change? Or do you think it's slower?
I think that sometimes you can, social media is a part of the world and the way things are now, but you can't, it's kind of like TV. Everything that you see on social media is not true. So I think a lot of times you may think that there's more representation than there actually is, depending on who you follow on social media. It can be a very narrow place to go. It's like when you are interested in a certain topic, you only go to these certain websites, or you listen to news only from this certain station. So you're constantly being fed all of these fact points that are in line with your own belief system. So I think a lot of times, I think social media may actually make it seem like things are really better than they actually are. I think that, when you compare, I know in medicine, when you compare, there's a documentary coming out soon. When you compare the number of Black men who were in medical school in 1970 to today, there were more Black men in medical school in 1970 than today. What does that mean about society? What does that mean about representation? To me, it means nothing has changed. Nothing has gotten better. If anything, things have gotten worse. You would think that, what is that? Over 50 years, you would think that there would be more representation. So it's definitely still a problem. And I don't think that, while I think social media gives you superficial access to a lot of different people and does allow you to see that other people who may look like you or have some traits that are similar to you are doing some of the things you want to do, you can't let that make you believe that everything is just everything is improved.
Mm-hmm. And or Tiffany, Toyin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think Kristen kind of mentioned it. I agree. If you looked at my Twitter or my Facebook, you would think that 90% of the physician force was African American, when we know that is not the case. But like you said, it has made mentorship and sponsorship easier, in that you can access these people if you want to, if you're looking at different opportunities. But at the end of the day, I don't think the amount of us or the representation that has really changed in the last how many years.
Yeah, I think that's actually, it highlights a really important point that now in this time of social media, we can see kind of like all of the highs and all of the lows. We're exposed to, it's Black History Month. People are posting their favorite like Black women or Black men in history. You're getting exposed to these scientists that you might not have learned about in school. And it can feel like things are going a certain way depending on what you focus on. But perhaps that average of sort of enfranchisement or disenfranchisement of especially the Black community is pretty equitable to what it was kind of years ago. And so I think with that in mind, when you think about representation of Black women in STEM, especially at this point in time with current events like COVID-19 exacerbating the digital divide, with the Black Lives Matter kind of protests, I think even stigmatizing parts of the US further. How do you feel like that has or could exacerbate some of, I guess, like some of the obstacles Black women face when pursuing technical positions? Or do you think it will? Or do you think it'll help?
I think it has. So I think it's a matter of us acknowledging the fact that there will always be barriers. So if it's not a COVID-19, it's going to be something else. If it's not this, is going to be that. But understanding what is that roadmap that we can provide to people to go along to build and frame their own journey, and letting them know that it is possible. Yeah, you're always going to have distractions. You're always going to have people saying you can't and can't do, or you can't achieve. But how do you overcome that? And I think that's something that why you have that, to me, community is extremely important. And if I even go into a space where I don't see a community, I'll build it. So I'll easily build my own community, because that's what I need in order to thrive, in order for me to be successful. And I've always encouraged people when they go into new spaces, find your community, build it, whatever that looks like for you, but make sure you find your support system in order to achieve the purposes that you may have for being there.
Kristen, Toyin, anything to add?
I think if I got your question correct, you're asking, did COVID-19 exacerbate or make things worse for Black women? Am I
Better,
correct?
yeah.
Or better? Okay. I would say, I mean, I think with COVID-19, I think it has gotten a little bit worse. I was reading a couple articles last week, and I know that Black women make up a lot of what we consider to be essential workers that keep our communities running. And I saw that the employment rate is actually has doubled among Black women. Additionally, I don't know if anybody's been following the news, but a woman, Dr. Susan Moore, passed away because of COVID. And this is a woman that we would consider educated, understands what's going on, can advocate for herself, and she still did not get the care she deserved. So, I think in light of with COVID going on, things have gotten a little more unequal. And like Tiffany mentioned, there is going to always be a barrier, but we can definitely work through it.
Yeah. And if I can build on what you said, Toyan, for me, it could have gotten worse, but I think it also exposed to everyone else what already existed even before COVID-19. Because before COVID-19, we still had those disparities happening in the medical field. We still had, injustices happening when we went into the workplace. We still had to overcome so much. I think COVID just exposed it at a greater level. That work has always existed, and no one really, as a whole, as a country, really taking on that mantle to address them.
I totally agree with that. It's really the exposure piece that I think COVID has really, brought into the consciousness of just the American public, people who aren't Black or brown, to realize, it's like they just learned it yesterday. There's health disparities, and there is racism in medicine and racism in the US. It's mind-boggling to me, really, how many things, how people feel like a lot of this information is new. I am hoping that it leads to a lot of long-lasting changes. It's yet to be seen if anything will really change because of this new level of consciousness and wokeness, if you will. But I definitely think COVID, as Tiffany and Toyin said, has made a lot of things worse in terms of, COVID has directly impacted Black women and the Black community harder than a lot of other communities in America, including, all peoples of color, Latinx and also indigenous communities have been particularly hit hard by the virus, have had a lot of deaths, mortality and morbidity, losses of jobs, all those things. So it definitely, I think it's made things worse, but it's definitely brought a lot of these social issues to light, and it's yet to be seen what this new consciousness, what the effect will be on the social environment in America.
Mm-hmm. And so I do kind of want to follow up on that a bit, but given the time, I'd like to spend the last about 15 minutes or so of the moderated Q&A switching to allyship. So my first question that I want to pose to you all is, can you name a time in which you've had a really great ally representing you, or a time in which you wish you did, and what kind of stood out to you about that experience?
So I think my greatest ally was when I was starting to apply for my residency position in medical school. And it was this radiology attending. She was Latinx. I had been struggling with imposter syndrome up until that point. I didn't think I was good enough. I was thinking about taking a year off to make myself a stronger applicant. And she went through my whole application, and she looked at me and she said, "You're gonna do just fine." She was one of the first people to kind of really tell me that I was gonna be okay. And sure enough, I did. She listened to a lot of my concerns, and that was big for me. Someone who listened is very, very big in allyship. I feel that while people are well-meaning, they're still kind of talking over you, and they're not really listening to your problems, and they're kind of trying to apply their own fixes without really listening to what the problem is. And I think that was a beautiful example of allyship, even though it was a personal one. I to this day thank her for that, for really believing that I could do it.
Tiffany, Kristen?
Yeah, I think for me, I've had to struggle with that allyship word. It seems it's relatively new in discussions. Either you support me or you don't. And I don't think putting a title to it, the title actually kind of makes it feel like, okay, well, why are you doing it? Are you doing it to get the allyship title to put on your LinkedIn profile? Or are you just doing it because you care about my personal development and well-being? But when I think about those who may not look like me, who stepped in on my behalf to offer their support or even their brand or even their guidance, they've been more sponsors for me in spaces where I did not exist yet. And they felt confident and invested in me enough to take me along. So to me, that made the bigger difference, instead of just telling me what to do and saying, "Tiffany, come along with me, come do this with me," or, engage on this project with me. I think you'll be great to do work on this engineering project, or, to take on this effort in which we're leading for some of the executive leaders of the company or whatever. I think for me, that's had a bigger impact more than someone telling me what to do, but take me along with you. Take someone taking me along their journey, for them to not only learn how others may see when they bring me in spaces that they probably think I should not be. And then we're both learning and having an experience at the same time that we can then reflect on afterwards.
I agree with everything that's already been said. I really think it's those micro opportunities that I really have appreciated. The micro opportunities where other people have put me in spaces or asked me to work on a project that maybe I didn't even know about, or I, because of imposter syndrome, I didn't think that I had the qualifications for, and they got me involved, or they told me to apply for this thing or this award or this position. And I really feel like that is really the best way you can be an ally, is bringing people who may not already be in the room into the room.
So, along those lines, do you have any other suggestions for, I guess, how you view successful allyship? I know allyship, I guess, is supposed to be a never-ending journey. I think I also personally struggle a bit with what the term means itself, but maybe like if you could summarize what it means to you and any other thoughts you have on like what makes a good ally.
I guess I'll go first. But to me, it just means being a support person for anyone else, and being a sounding board, if you will, and being there in the fight or the struggle or what have you with them, and being willing to do the work. I also think that a great ally is someone who listens and learns from that listening. I think that a lot of times I have friends and colleagues who may have different backgrounds than I do, and they may have different experiences than I do. And I think it's important as an ally that you're not always quick to dismiss their experience and say, oh, that's not what that person meant. You're just being overly sensitive. You have to be respectful of that person's experience and that person's perspective. And I think that is key to being a good ally, is making sure that you are open to hearing different perspectives other than your own.
Yeah, I agree with what you've said. I especially like the doing the work part. I think with the whole Black Lives Matter movement that's happened over the summer, everybody's saying they're committed to diversity, but in terms of actual work that's been done is very, very variable. So doing the work, I mean, the internet is free. There are many people of color that have written books, blogs, podcasts. It's overwhelming, really. Just doing the work and not putting someone of color in the place of having to teach you, because it's not really their job to do that. But definitely committing to the work is a big, big part of allyship. Even just saying that you support isn't enough.
Completely agree with both of the ladies, what they've shared. And my sister's a surgical nurse, so one thing that they often in your medical world is like situational awareness. So just being aware of what's happening around you. And I think if people just open their eyes and just take a look in terms of who's in the room and who's not in the room, and what role could you play, even as an individual contributor. You don't have to be a director or a people manager in order to drive impact and drive change. But just what can you do as an individual contributor or person to actually change the situations and change the environment around you, to be more reflective of some of these pledges and promises that many of our leaders or government officials have made when it comes to diversity in the spaces in which we move and live.
If there's one lesson that you or item that you might share with someone who really wants to make an impact in the realm of representation in STEM, or adding diversity to their company or their community, what is one thing that you would share with them to do or keep in mind?
That's good. Oh, goodness. I think one thing I've recently read an article about how people of color can't see some of what may appear as extra attention as what's the word they use? as someone almost pacifying them or giving them something because, you know, of their skin color, of their gender, but just thinking about it like, you deserve this. And I think people have to, if you're going to operate and move in DE&I spaces, don't do it thinking that you're doing it because, oh, it's like a good deed, or the woe is me and I want to do a good charity for a certain group of people. If you do it with all of your heart and mean it and have real investment in it, or just send a donation so someone else can do the work and be genuine with it. I think people can often see when you're not being genuine and authentic in your reason for supporting DE&I. But if I say, and all that to say, if I had one thing to tell somebody, be authentic, be yourself, you know, and be genuine. So, yeah.
Toyin,
For
Kristen?
sure. I definitely agree with Tiffany, being authentic. I would probably say keep the same energy that you use to recruit the diverse candidates at the organization. So making sure that you are putting in that same effort for recruitment into putting in the equal amount of effort into making your workplace diverse and keeping it in an inclusive environment. I think oftentimes your places are so focused on recruitment that once a diverse candidate gets there, an underrepresented candidate, then you feel like, okay, I'm here, but the actual environment is not open to my ideas, is not open to giving me opportunities, and you sometimes can feel very stifled. So making sure that there is equal focus on not only recruitment, but also creating this supportive and inclusive environment for everyone.
Yeah, that's a great point that I wish we would have had time to ask more questions about, but it does really require both equal focus and different actions to ensure that you're getting diversity at the place of talent acquisition, at retention to keep that community, and then at promotion to be sure that there's people in positions of leadership to continue that. So I think that's a really great point. Toyin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
What Tiffany and Kristen brought up already were both great points. I guess the only thing I would add is to be open to critique. Check in. Are your efforts actually taking hold and doing what they're supposed to? Have you met the goals that you've set? Don't be upset if you get some strong feedback. It takes a village, really. But that would be my biggest advice.
So my last question before we open up for open Q&A is from the other perspective, what is the one lesson or piece of advice that you would give to any Black women, any person from an underrepresented community that is pursuing a career in STEM where they might not see other people that look like them? One thing to keep in mind.
If they don't see anyone that looks like them?
Yeah.
That's okay. You got a mirror. You can see yourself. And then eventually you're going to pull somebody else up along with you.
That's great, Kristen. Toyin?
I guess give yourself grace. I think when you don't see people that look like yourself, you feel like you need to take the world on your back and really prove it to people. Give yourself grace. If it takes you a little bit longer, that's okay. It's a marathon. It's not a race.
I'd say probably don't be afraid to reach out. Like I said earlier, with social media, with being able to Google people and find people's websites and emails online. I'll send emails to people I don't even know. Sometimes they don't reach out back to me or respond, or sometimes they'll say they're too busy to, answer what questions I may have. But I know when I was looking at emergency medicine and some other fields within medicine, I would reach out to people I didn't even know just to ask them, hey, you have a few minutes to speak to me about your field of medicine. I'm trying to make my decision in terms of residency and things like that. So I think because we are all in this together, we all know a lot of the struggles that we go through to get to this point. So you'd be surprised how many people are willing to help you and get you to that next point. So don't be afraid to reach out.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now, and we'll open it up for some open